Well, welcome. We're at Grandview Rabbitry here, and Brian Letson is with me, and this is his outfit, and he specializes in small animal equipment and supplies, and especially rabbits. And so thank you for watching today, and what I'd like to show you is just various aspects of what Brian does here, what he has available, and not too much detail on how he does it, but what he has available for you and what he does. So one of the first things that we see here is when the wire comes in, Brian, you bring rolls of wire in, and how long are they?
They're 100-foot rolls.
100-foot rolls.
Yeah.
And you get various gauges.
Various widths and gauges. So we normally make the rabbit cages with 14 gauge wire, and then they come in widths from anywhere from 12 to 48 is what I would have in stock.
Okay. Now, when you get the wire, you put it on a machine like this. If you're making cages, this is called a roller, is that correct?
That's right.
And what's the purpose of this roller?
The roller helps flatten it because sometimes the rolls can be very high tensile and they would just spin out on you if and run away. If you had it down your driveway, it would just keep on rolling out. Sometimes it's at high tensile. So the roller helps flatten it out and keeps it controllable.
Easier to work with.
Absolutely easier to work with.
Easier to work with.
So this is a roller here. This was a custom made that I got a neighbor to build for me. So anything is possible if you can, if you're handy with making things.
So it's electric?
Yeah, so this one we connected to electric motor. I did that and then hooked up electric to it. And then it just slowly rolls out the wire. And then you can cut it to the length that you want. Now I have that one squished down pretty good that it's actually curled the other way, but you can adjust it to be flat or curled as it shows.
So easier to work with. So the first thing you have to do is you roll it out and then cut the lengths you need.
Yeah, I use a nibbler to cut it to the length that you would want.
Is it like a shear?
Yeah.
You called it a nibbler.
There's all sorts of different names. Nibblers, unishear.
Okay, cool,
Yeah.
cool. Okay, so this is the big table that you have here that's doing that work for you.
Yeah, it's a 10-foot long table for me to get that work
Okay,
done.
now once you get the wire on the, do you actually start assembling here? Or do you cut everything? How do you do it?
I cut all my pieces and then to length, and then I will do assembly. So if I'm making 10 cages, I'll cut all the pieces and then do all the assembly afterwards.
And what kind of product do you use to join them together?
So normally I would use a pneumatic ringer. It's just easier and more convenient for me to do it that way instead of the J-clip with a J-clip plier or a C-ring.
C-ring.
With just a hand tool.
We'll show some of that a little later, what those tools look like. Okay, we have a cage here that we brought out. We'll just bring it over here a little bit. So cages, now when I had rabbits, my cages were, and you make all sizes. This is an individual cage, obviously, with a tray. I would never use the trays because I always had them set up in stands and drop trays underneath. And what do we use for that? Fiberboard is what you have available, isn't it? Is that what you call it?
Well, there's also corrugated plastic that we can use too.
Okay, okay. I think that's the thicker stuff.
Just like corrugated cardboard. What your cardboard boxes are made out of, your heavy cardboard boxes are made of, just that it's plastic, so it'll last for years if you keep it out of the sun.
Yes, yes. Now this cage has a tray, so there's a drop tray. Now sometimes there's a urine guard that goes in here as well.
Yeah.
It's about 2 inches that goes around on the inside.
Four normally.
4.
Yeah.
Okay, and that keeps everything to come into the tray.
It helps.
It helps.
It helps.
Yeah, it helps. It doesn't always work 100%. So.
And then the trays can be made whatever height people would like. That standard is 1.5 inches, but we can go higher. And that allows for a longer collection period and doesn't build up and through the floor if you don't change it every day, if you don't clean it out every day.
Yeah. That's what I found with the trays. It was too much work for me. I did have a
It's
setup.
very time consuming.
Too much work. I liked it where it just drop down onto the floor and then clean it out that way. So as you were saying, it has a tray that you can slide out. And I used to use a big scraper and scrape it, put it in the wheelbarrow. And I even used to put some shavings in there a little bit, or chopped straw would help to absorb the urine. And I might get an extra day out of it that way, and before I had to dump it.
Well, the shavings also helps with the smell too.
Correct.
Yeah.
So I see that there's a door here. What do you call this kind of a door latch?
Spring latch.
A spring latch. They were the best I always found. Rabbits have a hard time of undoing them. The other kind.
The two-piece latch retainer, sometimes a rabbit could get that one open somehow. Not too sure how.
It seemed to be somehow they always did. They are tenacious. They can always figure something out. Around the door, you also have, this one is red. What's this called?
Door guard.
Door guard, and that's more for me than for the rabbit, isn't it?
Well, that one there on this cage is for dress, for looks.
Okay.
On a commercial rabbit cage, we don't bend the wires over like this, and we put the guard on the inside. For the pet cages, more like what this one is, we bend this over and then dress it up with the guard. Other than that, the guard on the door hole, you said it might be more for yourself, but if there's any sharp edges, that can also protect the rabbit if you're going in and out.
Talk about the floor versus the walls and the top, gauge-wise. What do you usually do?
So that's a good question. The commercial cages, we normally go with 16 gauge in the top, or unless we put the doors in the top, or unless customers ask for 14 gauge, just to make a little bit stronger construction. But normally in a commercial building, 16 gauge, which is lighter than 14, is more than sufficient. And then we go with 14 gauge for the sides, and the floor is also 14 gauge, but it's a 1x1/2 spacing instead of 1x1 like this.
The commercial you were saying usually have a little bit lighter. Is that to save some money?
The lighter on the top, yes. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a little bit cheaper, and doesn't have to be super strong in the top.
Anything else that you might say about the gauge wire and differences? I noticed when I would see European cages and even some other commercial cages that I've seen in the US, they're even a heavier gauge, especially on the floor. Why might they do that? Are you aware of anything there?
Depends on what manufacturer you're talking about. They probably go with a wider spacing, and then they go with a heavier wire then. That's going to be custom. They probably do the welding themselves then. They probably have a bigger factory where they will do all their custom wiring. But readily available is a 1x1/2 14 gauge material.
Okay. Now, I also know that here in Canada there are standards, and they've been changed recently. Tell me a little bit of what you know about manufacturing rabbit cages.
Yeah, so in Canada, before 2020, they came up with some new rules and regulations. Some of them are grandfathered in, so check your guidelines of what you're allowed to use. But now they've come to the fact that they're supposed to be, 15.7 or 16 inches high for the rabbits from the floor to the top. And for the bucks, they're supposed to be 18 inches high. And for spacing wise, it really depends on the rabbits. Now, those measurements are really for the commercial world based on a New Zealand white rabbit, on the size of a New Zealand white. Since that's kind of the standard here in Ontario is New Zealand white rabbits.
And that's the commercial, which would be the Californian as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the how many rabbits or the dimensions of the cage itself really goes by how big your rabbit's going to be for the floor spacing.
So in other words, if you're separating them already at 8 to 10 weeks at 4 or 5 pound fryer, they're not getting to be 10 pounds. You can't keep that many in the cage anyways together older than that. So
Yeah.
So basically at the 10, 12 week mark, they come out, they're only going to weigh so much. So the cage has to support it, has to be enough square footage for that.
It has to be enough spacing for
Let's
the rabbits.
talk a little bit about the tools that you can use. So for do-it-yourselfers, this is the C-ring clamp, and this is a better quality one because it has a spring that brings it back. This is a J-clip installer.
Yes, that's a J-clip plier.
Yeah.
And this is a
J-clip plier.
yeah, and this is also a J-clip plier here.
Okay. And so the J-clips are wider, and the C-rings are just more like a wire that gets around, and they're in the joining the wire together.
A pneumatic ringer that they come in a cartridge of 100 rings, and it's really fast and quick. And
Well, because you're doing lots of cages, you want to, but if you're doing one yourself, you can always, or a repair job, I always found you have to do repair jobs once in a while for various reasons. This comes in handy. J-clip pliers, I never liked the J-clip so much. I liked the rings were easier to work with.
they're easier to work with. J-clip, some people like them better because they're wider, heavier clip. But everybody has their own preference. And
There you go.
yeah,
Choice. We have choice.
correct. Like everything in this world, we need choice.
And so you carry all the pliers, you carry the rings, the J-clips, things like that. Okay, let's change the camera, and I'm going to go shoot here and just show some things that you have here.
Sure.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Brian has lots of supplies for rabbits. Let's start out with some of the feeders here. The J feeder, this is an extra large. It has a slotted mesh on the bottom to keep the fines to go through, and that will hold a lot of feed. Who would
It holds a lot of feed.
Who would use a feeder like this?
There's not a lot of people that ask those, but ones that have large cages, have large litters in there, that would just go feed them once a day, and they want to make sure that there's lots there.
I can see this being for a Flemish giant litter.
Well, yeah, even some litters of New Zealand that are like 12 rabbits, and they have a large cage, that's gonna, like your standard 8-inch wide feeder, 8 rabbits in there that are around 6 pounds will eat that feeder out before the whole 24 hours is up. And
Correct. So this would be
go,
a standard J feeder. It's 8 inches, you said?
yeah, it's 8 inch.
Yeah, it's again slotted at the bottom. You can get it without, where they're just pre-drilled holes. I assume these are a little more costly.
Yes, they're a little bit more expensive.
Okay.
And it's just to allow the fines to come through, so there's nothing that cakes in the corners on that perforated feeder.
And then this is this also, so these hang from the outside, and you cut a 2-inch by 8-inch slot, and they slide into the cage, and then you put a wire around, holds it. This sits completely on the outside, same idea. It would be a smaller hole that you would have to
It's
make.
actually a bigger hole that you have to cut for height-wise, so the
Okay.
rabbits can get their head in.
Oh, so that's right, so that they can come in here. So,
Correct.
And you would tell them what that would have to be if they purchased this. But this is a different style of feeder. What would you call this?
That's a flush feeder.
A flush feeder.
Yeah.
Okay. And see, it just has it's just holes drilled on the bottom to let the fines come out. And then there's the one that I really liked is this kind here. When I would just have single rabbits, this was perfect. It's what, a 4-inch?
It's a 4 3/4. We call it a 5-inch feeder.
A 5-inch feeder, slotted. And when I was raising rabbits for show, and I would grow them up to junior and 6-8 months old, I would use a feeder like this. Would be just enough for one day.
It'd be more than enough, yeah, for sure.
I always fed twice a day, morning and night, so I wouldn't even put a lot in this, but this was a great feeder. And then, of course, there's the hay feeder. And I always would clip these onto the door and throw my Timothy hay in here. And good to give the rabbits hay once in a while. Some people feed it all the time. I didn't. I would just from time to time feed hay for various reasons. And a good hay feeder. I see you also have a much smaller feeder here. Who would use a feeder like this? Again, a J feeder.
Yeah, it's a 3 3/4-inch wide feeder. So that's a feeder that some people use if they just have one single rabbit and they don't have a lot of cage front space. So if they want a door a certain size and they only have an 18-inch wide front, they would get that size feeder because it's just a small Holland Lopper mini Rex type breed.
Okay, now let's talk water bowls here for a while. You have various kinds. You have plastic and galvanized, and so a lot of it comes to preference. The whole issue with water, I always found, is wintertime. Wintertime. What kind of crocks are you going to use? I call them water bowls. Some people call them crocks. And I like the metal ones because you could bang the ice out of them if they did get frozen without doing too much damage and breaking. Plastic, I think, a little more tendency to have issues, or how do you find people?
Well, plastic can break. There's definitely no doubt about that. But it's a preference thing again. Some people prefer that plastic, some people prefer the metal.
And so you have various sizes in plastic, larger ones. How big would this one be?
That's a 20 ounce.
A 20 ounce, a smaller one. Usually this would be one rabbit.
Yeah, that's
they clip
10 ounce.
on, and there's a clip that goes on the back. You know what I found about these, Brian? There would be rabbits that would know how to chew this stuff. You wouldn't think they could, but they would chew down, then you couldn't get as much water in that you wanted. They were always chewing. Rabbits are so tenacious, especially with these kind of bowls. Is not as thick plastic, but they're cheaper, so a lot depends.
It's a lot cheaper. The gray ones, it's a little more pliable plastic, so there is logic with using the lighter gray ones in the wintertime because it's easier to get the ice out.
Yes.
And the black ones, they're a little more heavier plastic. It's more non-resistible. That's the key word, resistible.
Resistible, not impossible.
No, it's definitely possible for them to chew. It just might take certain rabbits a little bit longer to chew through, that's all.
Now you also have bowls. Now these...
I do have the pottery crocks. I don't recommend those for any winter environments because if they freeze, they're broken.
Yes, but a lot of people like them if they have their rabbits in a heated environment, which causes ventilation problems, or can. I always found that an issue. But anyways,
they're good heavy bowls.
They're good heavy bowls. They can't move them around too much, but some people like. So lots of preference when it comes to water. Even the galvanized ones here. This is a very large one, and then there's the smaller ones. That's a very small one. There's the next size up, and these all hang on the outside. Now I use these all the time because I came up with an idea of how to heat these, and I would add a resistor on the bottom, a low voltage 12 volt, and these wouldn't freeze on me outside, and all my rabbits are outside. I'd keep them outside in the winter, which was healthier, I found. As long as they're out of the wind and they had a pad to sit on, I could keep water minus 15 outside, wouldn't freeze. And 20 years I used that system. I gave it to some of my friends, or they paid for the materials, and I built systems for them. And a lot of work though, but it worked. And so I would always use metal. You know, I bought lots of metal ones from you.
Absolutely, yep.
And so you have all the galvanized, various sizes. So when it comes to water crocks, there's lots of options. It all comes down to what you're willing to pay and what works for you. But then there's also the bottles. You come with the plastic bottles in various sizes with the nipple. Again, in the winter, this becomes a problem with freezing. And that's why I would go with the crocks always. Year-round, I wouldn't have to worry about it.
Yeah, and I have heard that there is I did a little bit of research, that there's even one bottle there that, at one point anyways, that was a heated water bottle that was hooked up to electricity, but it wasn't CSA approved, so I was staying away from it.
Yes, yeah. And so they're great in the summer. The issue is that if you're switching between this system and a crock, there are some rabbits that I found, no matter what you did, couldn't figure this out.
It's a retraining process again.
It's a retraining process. So I would just stay with one type all the time. So it depends what your rabbitry is like in the winter, depending on whether you would use this. And the other thing is, it would depend on whether you have 5 rabbits or 50 rabbits. That's what I found. To do all the water bottles would be too much work. Whereas with the crocks, I would have a hose with a handle sprayer that I know Brian sells here, and I could just go along and fill up all the water real quick. Not even with, you could use a can too, but I would have the hose and I could do it within minutes, water all the rabbits. Whereas to fill this all up, if you only have a couple, this is great. But if you have a lot of rabbits, it's no fun. I see you have a weigh scale here that you attach a basket to for weighing individual. Before I would show rabbits, you'd always weigh them because they have weight limits in the classes, and you want to make sure you don't get disqualified for having a rabbit too heavy or even too light for the class. Now you have tattoo sets. You have both the Ketchum and the Easy Tat, I see.
Yeah, one is a clamp style and the other one is a pen where you can write it in. Yeah.
I found I could never work the pens well enough with the clamp. I could do lots of rabbits. You always needed help though. And but tattooing is something that if you're showing the rabbits, you usually have to tattoo them, depending whether it's the Canadian or the American shows you're going to. Even here in Canada, we have American shows. The American shows you have to tattoo. Canadian, you do not. But it's a good identifier for me. You don't lose track of your rabbits. And I was a Ketchum guy, and that worked best for me. And I got the hang of it. There's a knack of doing it, and I could do lots. But the other guys, they do the pen ones, and they get the hang of that, and they do them very quickly too.
Yes, some people love it because they can touch it up over the years. If something fades away a little bit, they can go back and touch it up.
That's right. That's right. What else have I missed here, Brian?
So the automatic watering system.
Automatic watering system. That's right. You have various types here.
Yeah, some you use the 5/16 spaghetti line, mean just a flexible tubing. And other one you'd use a more rigid line. So the one that's the 5/16 line, the flexible tubing, that's a barb drinkers that you'd use. You just heat up the line a little bit with some really hot water, and then you would slide that in over top of, or inside, slip the water nipple inside of the water line. And then the other style would be PVC pipe, so you'd use a threaded T or thread it right into the pipe.
Okay.
So those are for operations that...
big operations.
Yeah, smaller operators can use it too if they wish. If you're outside, it's not going to work in the wintertime, so...
So I see you sell the pads as well.
Yeah, the rest mats.
Say that again.
Rest mats.
Rest mats.
Yeah.
Okay, I just call them pads.
Yep.
And what they have clips on the end, and you clip it. You have to make sure you get it the right way in your floor, and you clip the other one and put it down. I always place these in front of the feeder, and the reason I would put it there is because for them to get used to it, to realize one, it helps their feet, and even in the cold weather to sit on this helps them to stay warmer. They don't seem to get the hang of it unless by putting it in front of the feeder, they're on it all the time. They get onto it that this is warmer, and then because I've put them just in the cage somewhere else and they never get on it because they were uncomfortable with it or whatever. But I would actually use a piece of plywood, put a couple screws in the bottom so that they wouldn't drag all over. But again, in front of the feeder is where I would place it so that they get onto it and figure it out that it's warmer in the winter and it keeps their feet from hurting. If they're a bigger rabbit, especially little guys don't have an issue with getting sore hocks, but the bigger ones do. So this helps with sore hocks.
It helps with sore hocks, absolutely. And it's the benefit over using something like the rest mat instead of the wood is that if they pee in the wood and then they're standing on a wood that is soaked, you got to take that out, clean it to get that urine out of there.
Yeah, generally I didn't find that a problem. What was the other way? Whereas this has the slot so the droppings go through, and on the wood it doesn't always. So, but yeah, they didn't seem to want to urinate on the wood that much. There'd be the odd one. If it got in the corner and in the way, then it would be, yeah. Whereas here, there's advantages and disadvantages. Let me say something about raising rabbits. There are many ways to do this. So long you're keeping them comfortable, healthy, and safe, that's all that matters.
Absolutely, you're right, 100% correct.
And so there's many ways of raising rabbits. And I've seen many ways of doing it. My way of raising rabbits was always making it easy for me. Make it easy for me because I didn't have 10 or 15, I had hundreds. So
that's right.
It was about easy watering, easy cleaning, easy managing them. And but I did use these. Yeah.
Yeah. I normally say what works for your neighbor may not work for you.
There you go. That's a good saying, Brian.
Yeah.
I like that. I like that. Have I missed anything else here? I don't think so. There's lots of other things that Brian sells, and if he doesn't, he probably knows where you can get it, or maybe he can even get it for you if you need it. So
Yeah.
anything to do with rabbits, especially, but you do for small animals as well. What other kind of cages do you build for people?
A lot of specialty for birds.
Birds?
Yeah, and all sorts of birds. Anything from pigeons to parrots, African greys. And then we also do some guinea pig cages as well. Those are the more common cages, but if anybody has, and quail, we do make some quail cages too.
Yeah. And so if people come with specific measurements, you can do it all.
Yes, well,
Yeah.
maybe not all, but we'll give it a try.
You're good. All right, let's talk a little bit about nest boxes. You have a nest box here, Brian. Just show us what you got. Now
This is a metal nest box. And the bottom has 2 floors. So normally make it that it's open bottom. So if somebody wanted to put a piece of plywood in the bottom, they can do so. That might be warmer in the wintertime if you go with something like that if you're in a colder environment. But other than that, there's for drainage purposes, we use a 2-piece flooring system in the nest boxes. It's quite a popular system to use. Your perforated material goes down first. Then you put a thin layer of straw or shavings in the bottom. Then you put the 1/2 by 1/2 on top. And then that's where you put the rest of your nesting material on. And that's where the rabbits will make their nest. The idea is that if the rabbits do pee in there, it drains in through the bottom and doesn't stay in that nest and the nest be wet. Sometimes the rabbits are really good and don't pee in their nest box, but as you know, Peter, that's not all the rabbits.
The idea is to try to keep the nest dry. Yeah. Okay. So you manufacture all these. You make them of various sizes.
I do make them in various sizes. 3 sizes are the most common, but we do make some extra large ones for the Flemish. But small ones, 18 by, the medium. Small ones are 12 by 8. The mediums are 16 by 9, and the large are 18 by 10.
Okay. All right. We're going to talk a little bit about carriers. Now, carriers are used for people who are showing their rabbits to keep them in individual compartments. It's not like taking them to market where they use, what do they call those larger?
We normally, around here, they're called chicken crates.
Chicken crates. They're big yellow, different colors, but usually they're yellow. And you throw all your rabbits in there to take them to market. Now, when you're showing them, you want to keep your rabbits in better shape, not hurting each other. So you can put one in each side. They come in various sizes, these carriers. Brian will make them to whatever size you need. This is a double carrier for 2 rabbits. It looks like it's big enough for 2 New Zealands and to take to the show. The lid comes up and put them in and out. You have handles on the side. Do you want to explain some things?
No, we got a solid divider there. Just these are show rabbits normally, so we put a solid divider in just so that there's no fighting and wrecking their coats, because I don't know if all the rabbits, I don't do showing, but if you do have a coat that's hurt, that's probably disqualification.
You don't want urine from the next door neighbor to get on it as much as you can, and you don't want them chewing each other, and they will do that and just mess things up for you. So that sort of protects them from one another. You have handles on it to carry it.
Yeah,
and
then we also put the guard along here so that there's nobody getting any scratched up, the rabbits or yourself.
And you make these in various sizes depending on the size of rabbit. It will be depending on how many you can carry. Generally, if you have New Zealanders or Californians, two in a cage is enough for most of us to carry. You're talking with the cage about 25 pounds, so that's a load. You put 3, boy, you're getting up to 30-something pounds. That's heavy for most of us to carry. So, but depending if you had a Dutch or Netherland dwarfs, you could put more in. You could make this a 4-banger by the looks of it. So the height and width all determined by the size of the rabbit you're going to use.
That's right.
And Brian has a good idea what you need, and he builds whatever. And you see there's a nice tray here. It's high. If you look, if I tilt it a little bit so that they really don't urinate outside, and there's lots of room underneath. I usually would put some shavings, or I prefer again chopped straw on the bottom to absorb, especially if you're going to a show for a couple days. And I could even put those little waters inside for feed, and those little cups, plastic cups for water and for feed. And I would put one cup on one end, another cup at the other end, so the water doesn't slosh into your feed. Yeah, all possible. Some people would just put the little cups that sit inside as well. So lots of ideas. Anything else you could say about the carrier, Brian?
No, I think that's about it. I think you covered it all.
What kind of machine do you have here, Brian?
So this is a wire bender. So it bends the wire. We just had a neighbor build this for me. Nothing too sophisticated. We just stick it in here. Put that up on either side. It holds it in place, and then we can bring it up. And there you've got a nice bend.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Wire bender. What have we got here, Brian?
So this is a box and pan. So when I make trays, this is what I use to bend up the sides. You would put the metal in to where you want it, bring this down, and then you can bring it up. So that's how you go about making a tray, or something that you want, as it says, box and pan, so to make a pan. So this is a great big press here that we can take a piece of metal like this, and this piece of metal isn't necessarily cut to size, but you can actually get 2 pieces of this, so that's your side of your regular J feeder. It doesn't, this machine doesn't pound out the bends, it just cuts it flat. So this here is a riveting machine. It's not anything that we have to pop rivet. We know drilling holes. We just, there's a rivet self-fed into here. We press the trigger and it punches right through the metal. And these are nickel plated rivets so they don't rust. And you can see that it's a nice solid rivet. A pop rivet would have a hole in the middle of the pop rivet, and this is a solid rivet.